The Zephyrian flagship Dominion's edge cut through the void like a blade through silk, its hull gleaming with the cold light of distant stars. Admiral Kexter stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed in satisfaction as he watched the blue-green marble of Earth grow larger in the viewscreen. The conquest had been easier than expected. Humans, despite their reputation for stubbornness, had surrendered after only 3 major cities were reduced to glass craters. "Status report on the primary extraction facilities," Kexter commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. "All 12 manufacturing centers are operational, Admiral," replied his second-in-command, Lieutenant Vexna. "The humans have been compliant in maintaining production schedules." Kexter's mandibles clicked in amusement. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 43 worlds, and each had fallen into the same pattern: resistance, defeat, acceptance, and finally useful productivity under Imperial guidance. Earth would be no different, despite the strange stories that filtered through the galactic communication networks about human ingenuity and determination. The Admiral's attention shifted to the industrial reports scrolling across his personal display. Mining operations on 6 continents were exceeding quotas by 12%. Agricultural zones were producing enough food to sustain both the human population and the Zephyrian occupation force. Most impressive of all were the manufacturing facilities, particularly the electronics and precision instrument factories that had been repurposed for Imperial use. "Take me to Facility Gamma 7, Kexter ordered. "I want to inspect our most productive site personally." The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, passing over landscapes scarred by the brief war, but already showing signs of recovery. Humans were nothing if not adaptable, the Admiral mused. Perhaps that was why they had survived long enough to develop interstellar travel, even if their technology was centuries behind Zephyrian standards. Facility Gamma 7 had once been called something else by the humans, a name that translated roughly to Silicon Valley in the Zephyrian tongue. Now it hummed with the production of communication arrays, navigation systems, and sensor equipment that would be integrated into the ever-expanding Zephyrian fleet. The facility stretched for kilometers, its modular construction allowing for rapid expansion as production demands increased. As Kexter's shuttle touched down on the landing pad, he noticed something that made his secondary eyes narrow with curiosity. A small building adjacent to the main facility bore no Imperial markings, no visible production indicators, and seemed almost quaint compared to the industrial efficiency surrounding it. Smoke curled from what appeared to be old-fashioned chimney stacks, and the sound of hammering echoed from within. "What is that structure?" he asked his escort, a nervous human liaison named Director Patel. "Oh, that's just Marcus Webb's workshop," Patel replied, wringing his hands. "He's a bit of an eccentric, but harmless. The previous commander allowed him to continue his work as long as it didn't interfere with production quotas." Kexter's interest was piqued. In his experience, anything the previous occupying forces had dismissed as harmless usually proved to be anything but what kind of work? "Toy repair mostly, broken electronics, damaged mechanical items. The workers' children bring him things and he fixes them, like I said, harmless." The Admiral's mandibles clicked again, but this time with a different tone. "Show me." They approached the workshop, and Kexter could see through the windows that the building's interior was indeed filled with what appeared to be children's playthings. Workbenches covered with disassembled robots, gaming devices, model vehicles, and various electronic gadgets created a chaotic landscape that seemed to follow no logical organization. In the center of it all, a human male with graying hair and oil-stained coveralls worked intently over something too small for Kexter to identify from his position. "Marcus Webb," Director Patel called out as they entered. "The Admiral would like to meet you." The human looked up, and Kexter was struck by the intensity of his gaze. Most humans had learned to avoid direct eye contact with their Zephyrian overseers, but this one showed no such deference. His eyes were a pale blue, almost gray, and seemed to take in every detail of the Admiral's appearance with the kind of analytical precision Kexter usually associated with military intelligence officers. "Admiral," Webb said, nodding politely but making no move to bow or show the customary signs of submission. "Welcome to my workshop." "I am told you repair toys," Kexter said, allowing a hint of condescension to color his words. "An interesting occupation for someone living under Imperial rule." Webb's expression didn't change. "Children need their toys, war doesn't change that. In fact, it makes it more important." The Admiral walked slowly around the workshop, noting the incredible array of devices in various states of repair. Some he recognized, gaming systems that had been popular throughout human space before the conquest. Others were completely alien to him, mechanical constructs that seemed to serve no practical purpose beyond entertainment or education. What struck him most was the precision of Webb's work. Components that would have been discarded as irreparable by any rational being were not only functional, but appeared to be operating better than their original specifications would have allowed. "This device," Kexter said, picking up what appeared to be a small robot designed to look like an Earth animal. "It's completely obsolete. Why waste time repairing it?" "Belonged to Sarah Chen's daughter," Webb replied without looking up from his current project. "Kid's 8 years old, lost her father in the siege of New Tokyo. Robot was the last thing he gave her before shipping out." The Admiral set the device down, feeling slightly uncomfortable with the human's matter-of-fact tone. "And you believe fixing broken toys serves some greater purpose?" For the first time since their conversation began, Webb smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Purpose? Admiral, with respect, I think you might be looking at this the wrong way. See, you folks came here and took over our factories, our mines, our farms. You've got us building your ships and growing your food and mining your metals. But there's something you missed." Kexter's forearms tensed slightly. "And what might that be?" "Hope," Webb gestured to the organized chaos surrounding them. "Every toy I fix, every smile I put back on a kid's face, every parent who sees their child playing again instead of staring at the sky wondering when the next bombardment's coming, that's hope. And hope, Admiral, is the one thing you can't manufacture in a factory or dig out of the ground." The Zephyrian officer felt his temper rising. "Hope is a luxury that conquered species cannot afford. You would do better to focus on accepting your new reality." "Maybe," Webb said, returning to his work. "Or maybe you'd do better to understand that reality isn't always what it appears to be." As they left the workshop, Kexter found himself more irritated than the encounter should have warranted. There was something about the human's casual defiance that bothered him on a level he couldn't quite identify. Director Patel, perhaps sensing his mood, attempted to smooth things over. "As I said, Admiral, he's harmless. The workshop actually serves a useful function in maintaining civilian morale. Happy workers are productive workers." "Indeed," Kexter replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Continue monitoring him. I want weekly reports on his activities." Over the following months, those reports became a source of growing frustration for the Admiral. Webb's workshop continued to operate, drawing a steady stream of humans bearing broken toys, damaged electronics, and mechanical devices that had suffered from everything from accident to deliberate sabotage during the resistance. What bothered Kexter wasn't the repair work itself, it was the results. According to his intelligence officers, devices that emerged from Webb's workshop consistently outperformed their original specifications. Toys that had been barely functional became remarkably sophisticated. Simple mechanical devices gained capabilities they had never possessed when new gaming systems that had been considered obsolete suddenly demonstrated processing power that rivaled some military-grade equipment. "It makes no sense," Lieutenant Vexner reported during one of their regular briefings. "Our technical analysis suggests that many of these devices should be physically incapable of the performance levels they're demonstrating." "Then your analysis is flawed," Kexter snapped, though he knew his anger was misdirected. "Run the tests again." "We have, Admiral, multiple times. The results are consistent. This human appears to be achieving technological improvements that our own engineers would find challenging to implement." Kexter stared out at the sprawling facility below, watching the orderly movement of human workers going about their assigned tasks. Everything appeared normal, productive, properly controlled. Yet something was wrong. He could feel it in the way conversations stopped when Zephyrian officers passed, in the subtle changes in worker productivity that didn't quite match the statistical models, in the growing sense that the conquest of Earth was not proceeding according to standard imperial protocols. "I want a complete technical analysis of everything that comes out of that workshop," he ordered. "Use our best equipment. I want to know exactly what he's doing and how he's doing it." "Yes, Admiral. Should we bring Webb in for questioning?" Kexter considered this. Standard procedure would be to arrest anyone showing unusual technical capabilities and extract whatever useful information they possessed through interrogation. But something about the situation felt different. Webb wasn't hiding his work or attempting to conceal his activities. If anything, he seemed almost eager for Zephyrian attention. Not yet, the Admiral decided. Continue surveillance. I want to understand what we're dealing with before we act. What they were dealing with, Kexter was beginning to suspect, was something far more dangerous than a simple toy repair shop. The humans had a saying that he'd encountered in the cultural briefings: still waters run deep. He was starting to think that Marcus Webb represented very deep waters indeed. As the weeks passed, reports from other facilities began to echo the anomalies observed around Webb's workshop. Productivity was up across all sectors, but so was an indefinable sense of renewed energy among the human workers. Resistance activities, which had dropped to nearly zero immediately after the conquest, were beginning to show signs of resurgence, though in forms so subtle that they barely registered on standard monitoring systems. The Admiral found himself returning to the workshop more frequently than he cared to admit, always under the pretext of routine inspections, but actually driven by a growing need to understand what was happening under his watch. Each visit revealed new mysteries, devices that should have been beyond repair functioning perfectly, humans who should have been demoralized showing signs of quiet confidence. And always, at the center of it all, Marcus Webb working with the focused intensity of someone engaged in far more important work than toy repair. You know, Webb said during one of these visits, not bothering to look up from the complex electronic device he was examining, I've been thinking about our conversation, about hope and reality and the nature of conquest. Have you indeed? Kexter replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. See, the thing about hope is that it's not just an emotion, it's a tool, a very powerful tool when used correctly. The Admiral felt his secondary eyes narrow. Explain. Webb finally looked up, that same analytical gaze fixed on Kexter's face. You conquered our world because you had better weapons, better ships, better technology. But technology isn't just about the hardware, Admiral. It's about the mind that shapes it, the hands that build it, the spirit that drives innovation. You can occupy our factories, but can you occupy our imagination? Before Kexter could respond, Webb returned to his work, leaving the Admiral with the uncomfortable feeling that he had just been issued a challenge disguised as a philosophical observation. As he left the workshop that day, Kexter made a decision that would prove to be either the wisest or most foolish choice of his career. He ordered his technical staff to begin a comprehensive analysis not just of Webb's work, but of human industrial output across all occupied facilities. If something was happening beyond the obvious scope of toy repair, he needed to know about it before it became a threat to Imperial security. The results, when they arrived 2 weeks later, would force him to confront the possibility that the conquest of Earth had been an illusion from the very beginning. The data that landed on Admiral Kexter's desk 3 days later would have been dismissed as sensor error if it had come from any other source. But Chief Technical Analyst Mordun was known throughout the fleet for his methodical precision, and the Zephyrian had never filed a report that wasn't absolutely accurate. Impossible, Kexter muttered, reviewing the findings for the 4th time. According to Mordun's analysis, human industrial output hadn't just maintained pre-conquest levels, it had exceeded them by margins that defied explanation. More troubling still, the improvements weren't limited to quantity. Quality metrics showed enhancement across every measured parameter. Admiral, Mordun's voice carried an unusual note of uncertainty as he stood before Kexter's desk. I've verified these results through 17 different analytical protocols. The data is consistent across all measurement systems. Kexter's primary arms drummed against his desk, while his secondary arms manipulated the holographic display showing production statistics from across the occupied zones. Navigation systems from Facility Delta 12 are operating at 137% of design specifications. Communication arrays from Gamma 7 are showing signal clarity that exceeds our own military-grade equipment. How is this possible? That's where the analysis becomes interesting, Mordun replied, his scaled features showing the kind of confusion that Kexter had never seen from his chief analyst. When we isolated individual components for testing, they performed exactly as expected based on their design parameters. But when those same components are integrated into complete systems, performance jumps dramatically. System integration effects. Not according to any engineering principles I understand. The improvements appear to be occurring at a level that our current measurement techniques can barely detect. It's as if the humans are introducing modifications so subtle that they become apparent only in aggregate function. Kexter rose from his chair and began packing, a habit he'd developed during his academy days when faced with tactical problems that refused to yield to conventional analysis. You're suggesting deliberate sabotage designed to improve performance rather than degrade it. I'm not suggesting anything, Admiral. I'm simply reporting what our instruments have measured. The uncomfortable truth was that Morden's findings aligned perfectly with Kexter's own observations from the workshop. Webb's toy repairs weren't just fixing broken devices, they were making them better than they had ever been. And if that principle was being applied across human industrial output, I want a complete investigation of every human worker with access to final assembly processes, Kexter ordered. Focus particularly on individuals with backgrounds in electronics, precision manufacturing, or advanced engineering. Admiral, that would include approximately 60,000 workers across all facilities. Then it will take time. Begin immediately. As Morden left to coordinate the massive investigation, Kexter found himself drawn once again to the workshop reports. There was something about the pattern of activity that nagged at him, a rhythm to Webb's work that seemed almost too convenient. Children arrived with broken toys, Webb repaired them, the toys returned to use with capabilities that exceeded their original design. Simple, efficient, and apparently harmless. Too harmless. The next morning brought news that crystallized Kexter's growing suspicions into active alarm. Lieutenant Vexna burst into his ready room with the kind of urgency usually reserved for combat situations. Admiral, we have a problem. The communication array in Section 7 just detected an unauthorized transmission. Details. Broad spectrum burst, approximately 3.7 seconds duration. The signal was complex enough to carry significant data, but we haven't been able to decode it. Kexter's mandibles clicked with irritation. Source. That's the problem, sir. The transmission appears to have originated from multiple points simultaneously across the entire facility. Our directional sensors can't isolate a specific location. The Admiral felt cold certainty settling in his chest. Show me the transmission timeline. The holographic display materialized above Vexna's portable unit, showing a three-dimensional map of the industrial complex, with transmission points highlighted in pulsing red. What Kexter saw confirmed his worst fears. The transmission points corresponded exactly to locations where devices from Webb's workshop had been returned to use over the past 6 months. Have we detected similar transmissions from other facilities? Checking now, Admiral. Vexna's fingers danced across her control interface. Yes, sir. Similar patterns from all 12 major installations. The transmissions appear to be synchronized across planetary distances with precision that suggests quantum entanglement communication, Kexter finished. Technology that humans aren't supposed to possess. That's what our technical division concluded. But Admiral, quantum entanglement communication requires exotic matter manipulation and energy sources that we haven't detected in any human facility. They simply don't have the infrastructure. Unless, Kexter thought grimly, the infrastructure was hidden in plain sight, disguised as something so innocent that even experienced occupation forces would overlook it, like toys. Bring me Marcus Webb's, he ordered, now. 2 hours later, Webb sat across from Kexter in the facility's primary interrogation chamber, his expression as calm and analytical as ever. The human showed no signs of stress despite the circumstances, and that composure bothered the Admiral more than any amount of defiance would have. We detected unauthorized transmissions, Kexter began without preamble. Transmissions that appear to originate from devices that have passed through your workshop. That's so, Webb replied mildly. Interesting. You don't seem surprised. Should I be? Admiral, you've been watching my work for months. Did you really think I didn't notice? Did you think I was just some harmless old man fixing broken toys while your people strip-mined my planet? Kexter leaned forward, his forearms spread wide in a gesture meant to intimidate. What are you building, human? Webb smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. I'm not building anything, Admiral. I'm fixing things, everything that was broken when you arrived. The toys are communication devices. Among other things, it's funny. Your people came here with such confidence. You'd conquered 43 worlds after all. You had the playbook down to a science. Destroy military resistance, occupy industrial centers, redirect production to serve imperial needs. Clean, efficient, predictable. The human's tone remained conversational, but Kexter could hear something underneath it that made his spine ridges prickle with unease. But you missed something. Something that all those other worlds either didn't have or couldn't access when you needed them to. Which was a network. Webb gestured casually, as if discussing the weather. See, every world you conquered was essentially isolated when you hit them. Oh, they had interstellar communication, but nothing that could coordinate resistance across planetary distances in real time. Nothing that could adapt and evolve faster than your military could respond. Kexter felt understanding dawn with the inevitability of a gravity well. The toys, they're not just communication devices. They're nodes in a distributed intelligence network. Now you're catching on? Every device I've repaired carries a quantum processing core derived from principles your scientists won't discover for another 3 centuries. Each one can communicate instantaneously with every other node in the network. And every node is learning, adapting, evolving. The Admiral's hands clenched into fists. This is impossible. Humans lack the technological sophistication for quantum consciousness engineering. Do we? Webb's smile widened. See, that's the thing about humans, Admiral. We're very good at making assumptions about what's possible based on incomplete information. You looked at our technology and saw primitives who'd barely achieved interstellar travel. But technology isn't just about the tools you can see. Before Kexter could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Vexna's voice crackled over the communication system with barely controlled panic. Admiral, to the command center immediately. We have a fleet-wide emergency. They ran through corridors that seemed strangely quiet despite the alarms, past human workers who continued their tasks with expressions of growing anticipation. When they reached the command center, Kexter understood why. Every display screen showed the same impossible sight. Zephyrian ships throughout the system were experiencing simultaneous cascade failures across all electronic systems. Report, Kexter barked. Navigation systems failing on 60% of the fleet, Vexna said, her voice tight with stress. Communication arrays showing massive interference patterns. Weapon systems are cycling offline randomly. And Admiral, our ships aren't the only ones affected. The primary display shifted to show the broader solar system. What Kexter saw made his blood run cold. Ships from every member species of the Zephyrian Empire were broadcasting distress signals. Vessels that should have been light years away were reporting identical system failures. How far does this extend? He asked quietly. We're receiving reports from observation posts as far out as the Rigel sector. Whatever's happening, it's affecting every piece of Zephyrian technology within a sphere roughly 50 light-years across. Kexter turned to Webb, who had followed them to the command center. The human was watching the chaos unfold with the satisfied expression of an engineer whose carefully planned project was finally reaching completion. What have you done? Like I told you, Admiral, I fixed what was broken. Webb gestured toward the displays. Your empire built itself on the assumption that advanced technology would always defeat inferior technology, but you forgot something important about humans. Which is, we don't just use technology, we become it. As if summoned by his words, every display in the command center flickered and resolved into a new image. Thousands of human faces, from children barely old enough to walk to elderly individuals in their final years. All of them were connected to devices that glowed with soft blue light. All of them were looking directly at Kexter. Hello, Admiral, they said in perfect unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that made the Zephyrian's nervous system rebel against the impossible sound. We need to talk. The network that Webb had built wasn't just a communication system. It was a collective consciousness that encompassed every human who had come into contact with his modified devices. And now, that consciousness was speaking with one voice to address the occupying fleet. We don't want to fight, the collective human voice continued. Fighting destroys things, and we prefer to fix things, but we can't allow your empire to continue operating on the principle that might makes right. You're threatening us, Kexter said, his voice barely steady. No, came the reply from thousands of throats. We're offering you a choice. Join us willingly, and we'll show you technologies that will revolutionize your understanding of what's possible. Refuse, and we'll simply ensure that your current technology can no longer function as a tool of oppression. On the displays, Kexter could see the scope of what the humans had accomplished. The network didn't just affect Zephyrian technology, it had somehow gained control over the quantum foundational principles that made that technology function. They weren't just jamming signals or introducing malware. They were rewriting the fundamental laws of physics on a local scale. "This is impossible," he whispered. "So was human consciousness," Webb replied from behind him. "So was love, creativity, art, music, and the ability to see beauty in a sunrise. Just because something seems impossible doesn't mean it is. It just means you haven't understood it yet." The collective voice spoke again, and this time Kexter could hear individual personalities within the harmony. Children's laughter, adult determination, elderly wisdom, all blended into something greater than the sum of its parts. "Your choice, Admiral. Will you help us fix what's broken in the galaxy, or will you try to maintain a system that was never sustainable in the first place?" Kexter looked around the command center at his officers, all of whom were staring at him with expressions that ranged from fear to desperate hope. Through the viewports, he could see human workers in the facility below, no longer pretending to submit to occupation. They stood tall, proud, and completely unafraid. The Emperor had mocked humanity's elf workshop, treating it as harmless busy work that kept the conquered population docile. But the elves, it seemed, had been preparing a gift that would change everything. Emperor Thexmer had ruled the Zephyrian Empire for 3 centuries, expanding its borders across 43 star systems and subjugating dozens of species with the methodical efficiency that had made his dynasty legendary. He had faced rebellions before, crushed resistance movements, and absorbed the technology of conquered worlds to strengthen his military machine. But the report that Admiral Kexter transmitted from the Sol system challenged everything he understood about the nature of power. "Repeat that," the Emperor commanded from his throne aboard the vast fortress ship Eternal Dominion. The Admiral's image flickered in the holographic projector, showing signs of strain that Thexmer had never seen from his most trusted field commander. "Your Imperial Majesty, the humans have developed a technology that we cannot counter through conventional means. They have created a consciousness network that operates through quantum-linked devices, and this network can selectively disable our technology across interstellar distances. A single world is holding our entire Rigel fleet hostage." "Not hostage, Majesty. They've made it clear that they don't want to destroy our ships. They want to change how we operate." Thexmer's 6 eyes narrowed as he processed this information. Change was not a concept that featured prominently in Imperial doctrine. The Zephyrian Empire endured because it imposed order on chaos, civilization on barbarism, unity on fragmentation. What the humans were proposing sounded dangerously close to revolution. Their demands. They're not making demands in any traditional sense. The network consciousness has requested permission to demonstrate what they call constructive integration with our technology. They claim they can enhance our capabilities while ensuring that those capabilities can no longer be used for conquest or oppression. The Emperor's mandibles clicked with barely contained fury. 300 years of expansion, and now a barely spacefaring species was proposing to dictate terms to the greatest empire in galactic history. And if we refuse, then every piece of Zephyrian technology within 50 light-years of Earth becomes permanently inoperative. Based on their demonstration capabilities, I believe they could extend this effect to encompass the entire empire if they chose to do so. Silence fell across the throne chamber as Thexmer considered his options. Military force was clearly useless against an enemy that could disable his weapons at will. Economic pressure was meaningless when dealing with a species that had already demonstrated they could function without imperial support. Political maneuvering required opponents who operated within recognizable frameworks of power, and the human network seemed to exist outside any governmental structure he understood. "Tell me about this Marcus Webb," the Emperor said finally. "A human engineer specializing in electronic repair. We initially dismissed him as harmless. By the time we recognized the scope of his work, the network had already grown beyond our ability to contain it." "How many humans are part of this network?" Current estimates suggest approximately 2 billion individuals, with the number growing by several million per day. The integration process appears to be voluntary, and humans are enthusiastic about joining. Thexmer rose from his throne and walked to the vast observation deck that overlooked the Imperial fleet. Hundreds of ships stretched across space, their hulls gleaming with the accumulated technological achievements of a galactic empire. Yet all of that power was now potentially meaningless against an enemy that could rewrite the fundamental principles underlying their technology. Has the network attempted to integrate with any of our personnel? No, Majesty. They've made it clear that forced integration violates their ethical principles. They will only connect with beings who choose to join freely and with full understanding of what the process entails. And what does it entail? Admiral Kexter's image hesitated before responding. Enhanced cognitive capacity, direct access to the accumulated knowledge of the entire network, instant communication across any distance, and what they describe as expanded awareness of interconnection. Several of my officers have expressed interest in the process. The Emperor's spine ridges stiffened. You will forbid any such experimentation immediately. Yes, Majesty. However, I should note that the humans have indicated they're prepared to wait indefinitely for us to make a decision. They seem confident that curiosity will eventually overcome our resistance. Thexmer cut the communication and stood alone with his thoughts for the first time in decades. The Empire had been built on the principle that superior technology, properly applied, could overcome any opposition. Yet the humans had somehow developed technology so advanced that it seemed indistinguishable from what ancient texts might have called magic. Your Imperial Majesty, his chief advisor, Minister Kelvox, approached with the careful deference that long experience had taught him. The Council of Hierarchs has convened an emergency session to address the situation. Let them convene. Schedule a direct communication with the human network. I want to speak with this consciousness myself. Majesty is that wise. If they can integrate technology, who knows what they might do to what, my mind? Thexmer's laugh carried no humor. Minister, if they wanted me dead, I suspect I would already be dead. If they wanted my empire destroyed, it would already be scattered across space. They want something else, and I intend to discover what. The communication was established within hours, creating a direct link between the Imperial flagship and the human consciousness network. When the connection activated, Thexmer found himself looking at an image that defied his expectations. Instead of a single spokesperson or even a council of leaders, he saw thousands of faces arranged in a complex pattern that somehow conveyed both unity and individuality. Emperor Thexmer, the network spoke, each voice contributing to a harmony that was strangely beautiful despite its alien nature. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. You have made demands that threaten the stability of my empire, Thexmer replied, allowing steel to enter his voice. I would know your intentions. Our intention is simple. We want to fix what's broken. The empire is not broken. It has brought order to chaos, unity to division, peace to peace. The network's collective voice carried gentle contradiction. Your empire has conquered 43 worlds, displaced billions of sentient beings, and maintained order through the constant threat of violence. This is not peace. This is suppression. It is stability. It is fear. The image shifted, and now Thexmer could see individual faces more clearly. He recognized some species, Altarians, Centauri refugees, even what appeared to be Zephyrian civilians. Your empire maintains control by ensuring that no conquered species has access to technology that might threaten Zephyrian dominance. This creates stagnation, not progress. The Emperor felt his temper rising. We provide protection, resources, guidance to species that lack the capability for self-governance. Do you, or do you prevent them from developing such capabilities to maintain your advantage? Before Thexmer could respond, the display changed. Now he saw technical specifications for technologies that made his empire's achievements look primitive by comparison. Faster-than-light engines that didn't require exotic matter. Energy systems that could power entire worlds without depleting natural resources. Weapons that could neutralize threats without causing destruction. This is what becomes possible when minds work together instead of in competition, the network explained. When knowledge is shared freely instead of hoarded as a source of power, when technology serves all life instead of just those who control it. Pretty words, Thexmer said, though he found himself studying the technical displays with growing fascination. But implementation requires leadership, structure, authority. Someone must make decisions. Someone does, everyone does. The display shifted again, this time showing what appeared to be a vast decision-making process involving millions of participants. Democracy scaled to technological civilization levels. Every voice heard, every perspective considered, every decision reached through true consensus rather than imposed authority. Impossible. The complexity alone would create paralysis. Only if you assume that individual minds must process all information separately. When consciousness is truly shared, complexity becomes manageable. When knowledge is instantly available to all participants, informed decisions can be reached in moments rather than months. Thexmer found himself walking closer to the display, drawn by implications he was only beginning to understand. You're suggesting that my entire governmental structure is obsolete. We're suggesting that all governmental structures that rely on hierarchy and control are obsolete, not because they're evil, but because they're inefficient. They waste vast amounts of intellectual and creative potential by limiting who can participate in problem-solving. And you believe this network consciousness can solve problems that hierarchical governments cannot. We know it can because we've already started. The display showed Earth in real time, but not the Earth that Kexter had described in his reports. This world bustled with activity that defied explanation. Massive construction projects that seemed to reshape geography. Energy signatures that suggested power generation on scales that should have been impossible. And everywhere, humans working with a coordination and purpose that reminded Thexmer of how his own soldiers moved during perfectly executed military operations. We've reversed climate damage accumulated over 2 centuries in just 6 months. We've solved resource distribution problems that your empire classified as intractable. We've begun construction of space-based habitats that will house 1 billion individuals within 5 years. And we've done all of this while ensuring that every participant in the network has access to better living conditions than they experienced before integration. What do you want from the Empire? Nothing, came the unexpected response. We want to offer something to the Empire, the same choice we've offered to every human, voluntary integration into a consciousness that can accomplish more together than any individual could achieve alone. Thexmer felt vertigo as the implications hit him. You're proposing to absorb the Zephyrian Empire into your collective. We're proposing to give every member of the Empire, from emperors to agricultural workers, the opportunity to become more than they currently are, to access capabilities and knowledge beyond anything available to isolated consciousness, to participate in projects that span galaxies instead of being limited to single worlds. And if I refuse, then you continue exactly as you are, but without the ability to use technology to impose your will on others. Your empire becomes what it claims to be instead of what it actually is, a voluntary association of species working together for mutual benefit. The Emperor stared at the display for long minutes, watching human civilization transform itself in real time. Finally, he spoke. Show me what integration actually entails. Gladly. The sensation was unlike anything Thexmer had experienced in 3 centuries of life. For just a moment, his consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his physical form. He could feel the thoughts and experiences of billions of minds, each distinct yet connected in ways that created understanding without sacrificing individuality. He saw solutions to problems he had considered unsolvable, technologies that made his empire's achievements look like primitive tools, and possibilities that stretched across time scales that dwarfed his personal ambitions. When the connection ended, he found himself gasping despite his species' normally controlled respiratory patterns. That was just a sample, the network explained gently. Full integration preserves your individual personality and memories while providing permanent access to collective knowledge and capabilities. You remain you, but you become much more than you could ever be alone. Thexmer looked around his throne chamber with eyes that had been changed by even that brief connection. The displays of imperial power that had once filled him with pride now seemed small, limited, almost pathetic in their scope. The vast fleet outside his windows represented enormous effort directed toward maintaining control rather than advancing civilization. If I agree to this, what happens to the Empire? It becomes something better. Every species that chooses integration gains access to technologies and capabilities they never could have developed under imperial restrictions. Those who don't choose integration are free to pursue their own development without interference. The empire transforms from a tool of control into a platform for cooperation. And my authority. You keep all of it that serves legitimate purposes and gain access to influence and capabilities that your current position could never provide. Why settle for ruling over restricted subjects when you could help lead a civilization that spans galaxies? Emperor Thexmer had ruled through strength, authority, and the careful application of superior technology. But the humans had shown him something that transcended all three, the power of minds working together toward common goals. The choice before him wasn't really about maintaining his empire or surrendering to conquest. It was about whether to cling to limitations or embrace possibilities he had never imagined. He thought about Marcus Webb, the human engineer who had started it all by fixing broken toys in a small workshop. The man who had seen past the surface of conquest to understand that the real battle was never about who had the bigger weapons, but about who could envision and build a better future. The Emperor had mocked the elf workshop, dismissing it as the harmless tinkering of a defeated people. But the elves had built something that would transform not just their own world, but potentially every world touched by the network's growing influence. "When can we begin?" Thexmer asked. The collective smile of 2 billion humans lit up the display screen like a sunrise.